difference. But to go back to what knowledge occultism actually is comprised of, the bodies of knowledge, the two main bodies of knowledge are knowledge of the self and knowledge of the laws of nature. That's basically it. The knowledge of the self, the knowledge of the human psyche and how the psyche operates, its components, its aspects, its motivations, its desires, etc. What drives us? What's going on at a subconscious level? What's going on at the unseen level? In the recesses of the human psyche, in the psychological realms. This is what is known as the minor knowledge of the occult, the minor arcana. Arcana is a Greek word that means knowledge. Okay? I have a Latin word that means knowledge. I tell people don't look at this because it's called the minor arcana or the lesser arcana as meaning of lesser importance. That is not what it means. Body of science. Okay? So that's what I call light occultism. When you use this hidden knowledge toward the uplift of humanity, toward the expansion of consciousness and the expansion of morality. So the other way of using it is for manipulation, control, and the suppression of consciousness. And if this knowledge is used in that methodology, then I refer to it as dark occultism or sorcery, is a perfectly acceptable term for it. Thus, the practitioners of light occultism could be referred to as light occultists, magicians, magi, light builders, or light workers. All terms that I feel could be used interchangeably as long as we're looking at it within the context of occult knowledge as I have defined it in my working definition. And you could look at the practitioners of dark occultism as dark occultists, sorcerers, dark builders, or dark workers. All terms that I feel are perfectly acceptable and interchangeable with each other. Dark occultists' work is always done in secrecy. They don't want to do their works in the light of day where everyone can know what they're doing. They're constantly contravening the freedom and prosperity of all but themselves, of course. That's the out-of-control ego run amok. The pure left brain, modality of consciousness without the balance of the sacred feminine, compassionate, creative right brain. I consider this pyramidal, hierarchical, and compartmentalized structure the occult structure of our entire world. Dark occultists have completely infiltrated and permeated all institutional walks of life on Earth. This is a topic I constantly talk about in my work, on my radio show, my podcast series, and in the interviews that I do. It's so important for people to understand this is who's really running the show here on Earth. It's not just the international bankers. It is them, but they're dark occultists at the highest levels. The people involved in the political think tanks are dark occultists at the highest levels. The people involved in, corporatism and business at the very highest levels use these sciences and this knowledge. The high-level religionists in all religion, all ostensible religions, guaranteed they have this knowledge at the highest levels and they're using it for dark purposes. People want to think, oh, that's not happening in my religion. That's going on in all the other religions, but mine is completely pure and free of any wrongdoing. Yeah. And in general, how it works is keeping people chronically imbalanced toward one type of consciousness or another, one type of brain activity or another. Either the masculine left brain modality of consciousness or the feminine right brain modality of consciousness, but never actually holistically bringing them both together in a state of balance. They want it in a chronic state of imbalance, such that most people are either always left brain or always right brained. If the left brain, the masculine component of the brain, the intellect, depicted here by the upward pointing triangle, which is an ancient archetypal symbol known as the blade, representing masculine energy, a rudimentary phallic symbol archetypally. If that part of the brain, that left hemisphere, is chronically dominant in an individual, the following states can manifest within that individual: rigid skepticism or scientism, atheism, structured arch, you could look at it, where these two forces, combine and lean against each other. Left brain imbalance leans against right brain imbalance, creating a very rigid structure which is difficult to disassemble and take down because these forces play on each other. A right brain imbalance or feminine imbalance, the right hemisphere of the brain, which governs creativity, intuition, compassion, nurturing, etc. If that part of the brain that is depicted here by the symbol, the inverted equilateral triangle, which again is an ancient archetypal symbol known as the chalice, because it is a rudimentary womb. If that part of the brain is chronically imbalanced, or chronically dominant, I should say, these following states result: naivete, blind belief, religious extremism, total belief, total faith, not actually checking anything, but to believe that existence itself exists for no other reason than to survive is very left brain imbalanced. And randomness is the general hallmarks of scientism, atheism, and just about every totalitarian culture that has ever existed on this planet. Conversely, the deterministic worldview holds notions such as God controls every event in creation. This is a very right brain imbalanced worldview. Determinism often postulates, hey, since the whole universe is controlled and it's like a clockwork mechanism, but it's run by God, why bother trying to create any change? Change is impossible. It's already set in stone. Action, therefore, becomes ultimately meaningless. Why do anything? I tell religionists who think like this, why do you get out of bed in the morning? Why bother doing anything? Why say a word to another human being? Why eat? Why breathe? Why not just lay in a supine position in the corner somewhere and wait to expire from malnutrition and dehydration and then go back to dust? But many people, they actually say that this is what they believe. It's a big hallmark of salvationist religiosity, that action is meaningless. Only faith is what's required. Something that I'm vehemently opposed to. In the New Age, again, this right brain imbalance and this whole worldview of determinism is the hallmark of religious extremism and what I call slave think. The truth lies, as it always does, in the balance point. In the synthesis, in the coming together between extremes in many cases. And that is often extreme in itself because so few people are in that balance point. One more level above that is what we get based upon what we've done. What is manifested? What is generated? What do we experience? The manifested reality. It's the quality of the conditions that we experience. And the quality of the condition which manifests collectively in our society, in any society, is based upon the aggregate quality of behavior within that society. So again, it's a stepwise progression. What we've taken in, what we've come to understand, how we behave, what we get. I tell people this is the most powerful slide in all my work. If you understand one slide, deeply, deeply understand this process. Because this is what the dark occultists do not want people to understand. That's the real law of attraction, folks. Not the New Age variant of it. Not the New Age hokum mysticism. I want to sell 1 million billion books telling people what they want to hear, law of attraction. Okay? This is how the universe actually works inherently. And it describes not only how it works, but our relationship to that process. Great work. Now, why do light occultists hide occult knowledge? Because they do. Light occultists also hide occult knowledge. Light occultists have hidden occult knowledge in order to prevent its complete eradication during exceeding draconian times. And at other times, they have hidden that knowledge to prevent it from falling into the hands of would-be dark occultists. In other words, those who knew of the empowerment that could be gained from such knowledge, but who wanted to use it for immoral purposes or for purposes of manipulation and control. Occasionally, at times in history, those who consider themselves or others have considered light occultists have sequestered certain occult knowledge for these purposes. And again, if it's strictly for those purposes, I would not fully condemn that. However, at certain stages in history, like the one we're in now, where this information could be brought forward without immediately being, burned at the stake or something like that, or tortured in a horrific way, I do not agree with hiding it even for these purposes. Could the great work of light occultists, in stark contrast to the great work of dark occultists, which we've been talking about, is the distribution of occult knowledge freely to humanity, thereby ending the slavery of humanity by eliminating the widespread ignorance which dark occultists exploit to gain and maintain their control. Light occultists would be better referred to as de-occultists, which is a term I absolutely love and I consider myself. I don't even want anybody to call me a light occultist or an occultist in general. I like to be called a de-occultist. That's my task. That's my work. To break this knowledge out like an avalanche onto humanity and just let it flow freely where it will, so that people can take it in and we can level the playing field that has thus far been dominated by ignorance. So let's begin an initiation. All right? Again, initiation means beginning. We're going to look at some different schools of occultism, different occult sciences. I call them the many paths or the many ways, the many methods to the same place, to the same destination.
The method they use is that of the Hegelian dialectic. Thesis played against antithesis leads to a synthesis. In other words, for Hegel, for history to make progress, you have to have conflict. And when you look at the key people in the order, you will find that they generate conflict. So Bush and Harriman politically are conflicting. Coffin and Buckley, although part of the same order, are in public conflicting with one another because conflict leads to the new synthesis. What springs to my mind for some odd reason is the Essenes. What was it? The forces of darkness and the forces of light. That's the root of the problem.
Zarathustra defined it in the same way. Forces of good and evil.
Yes, that's what it comes down to.